And today, I want to talk about one of my favorite quotes, and it's by Gandhi, and that's, "Be the change that you want to see in the world." Now, I feel like sometimes this is interpreted in different ways. Some are looking at maybe that's a certain way you're supposed to look, where you're supposed to stay, what you're supposed to do in the world. For me, I really experience that quote as something that's more of the reflection of our internal journey. The things that I want to shift and bring more into in the world, am I being that on the inside? Because the outside world is a reflection of our inner reality. So if I'm coming from, it's good to be conscious of how I'm showing up in the world and how I may justify or condone not being those things in certain situations, more importantly, which is a lot of what's going on today in the world with the elections and a lot of different things going on. And I'm coming in today not to decide who's right, who's wrong, but on a conscious level, get clear about some of the things that I may be claiming to stand for, and then checking in and going like, am I really being those things? And if I'm not, what's the dialogue that I'm saying inside? What's the story I'm telling myself to condone or enable doing the very thing in which I claim to stand against? So let's check in first. One of the first word I wrote down is intolerance. That's a big word I've heard a lot of over the years. It's like how I want to be an example of tolerance. And I have to ask, is this something where I look inside and I claim to be about tolerance, but am I actually being tolerant or intolerant? Or am I only tolerant of the things that I believe in or that I think are right? What about when it's something that you're not in agreement with? Are you really reflecting tolerance or intolerance? Fear and anger. Man, we see so much fear, anger, upset going on right now in the world. I mean, and believe me, I know it feels very justified. However, there's an opportunity to check in and ask myself, do I stand for love or do I stand for fear and anger? Where is it that I want to be? What is it that I want to see in the world? Do I want it to come from a place of love or fear and anger? In some ways, am I claiming to want one but doing the other? The next ones are shame and guilt. Do I claim to stand against shaming people, guilting people? And what would be the opposite of that? Acceptance. How can I be more accepting of others and myself? So check back in and ask yourself, I see a lot of shaming and guilting on either side of the parties. You represent this or you represent that. And is there any part in you that is making somebody wrong or bad? Are you projecting certain judgments onto them because of a political party they're rooting for, that they're supporting? Check in, be honest with yourself. This is no one else is watching. This is you checking in with you. So it's an opportunity to be transparent with yourself, at least. Remember, this is not telling you to change anything. Just become consciously aware of those things that maybe aren't in alignment with what you're saying you want to be. Discrimination. Equality. Do I claim to stand against discrimination, but then take other groups? Do I take other groups of people and then now categorize them, pass certain judgments, fears, and things onto? And is that not the very thing in which I claim to stand against? We are each individuals. We are our own selves. And there's information that you can take away from certain situations to look into and to see if there's truth there. But to immediately classify groups by their political beliefs, by whether what part of town they live in, what profession they have, and you automatically pass judgment on them as a whole, a truth. You have to ask yourself, is that really a fact? Is it really a fact? And do you find in your own fears somehow you justify or enable doing the very thing in which you stand against? Do I want to represent segregation or inclusiveness? There is so much about us as human beings, so much more that is similar than different. And I don't know the stat offhand, but 99.9% of us as a human being is more alike than different. But yet our focus and our attention is always on those things that we find different, dividing us, separating us, versus putting the intention and the focus. We know that energy follows thought. So where's your thought? Are you more focused on how you're different or others are different? Or are you seeing all the massive amounts of us, aspects of us that are the same? Do you stand against injustice? Do you stand for justice? Now this one's a really interesting one, right? Because a lot of perspective determines one or the other. However, I think the more important question here is, in some ways, do I find myself enabling or condoning injustice in the name of justice? And then we have to ask ourselves, does that not become the very thing in which I claim to stand against? Are there other situations out there in the world where you see injustices going on? And maybe you don't recognize this, but that individual may have been experiencing or observing injustices in many other ways, which then now condone, enable them to do an unjust thing in the name of just. And do we in some way see ourselves doing that now in other circumstances and situations? Again, just a check-in. Do I want to stand for victimization or empowerment? How do I perceive others? Do I perceive them as incapable, or do I want to choose to see people as capable? Do I experience the world as life is happening to me or for me? This is a very, very important thing, because like myself, through my struggles and journeys and being in a situation where it wasn't fair, what happened to me, it's easy for the ego, the part that judges right, wrong, good, and bad, to get stuck in that world of it's unfair. And I'm frustrated and I'm upset about the new way that I have to live my life because of this very unjust person chose to do this thing to me. One thing I can tell you through my experience, through my life, through my journey, is that will not empower me to heal. It will not empower me to create change. What I do have dominion over is how I relate to the issue. And too often we're framing our minds to believe that circumstances, situations, and conditions out here determine the happiness within here. And I'm just telling you, that's the way we're conditioned in the society, but it's absolutely the number one way to fail in experiencing peace, love, and happiness with inside. Because that comes from a mindset of, once all these things are this way, then I can be happy in here. I don't know if you've ever heard of Viktor Frankl. However, incredible. He went through the concentration camps, the Jewish concentration camps. And just read his book, A Man's Journey Within. I believe this one was good. But read that and really hear, and it's not about condoning or enabling the things that were happening to him, but it's about taking dominion, taking control over his own choice of how to respond and how to experience peace, love, and happiness regardless of his circumstances. I hear a lot of blaming going on, and again, it's not fair. Blame, 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 it's not fair. And we get stuck in whether, and I'm guilty of this in my own journey, especially with being in law enforcement. It's in a lot of the terrible, heinous things that go on to people every single day, and the way they pretty much get away with it. And I think if most people saw that and experienced that, they would have a whole new perspective on a lot of things that they consider unjust in the world. But the reality is how can I shift that mindset to move me into a place of ownership and responsibility. That is, again, going to play off the empowerment, taking ownership of my own thoughts, of my own experiences, taking responsibility for my own upset. This is an approach that empowers ourselves. Mentors of mine taught me this very valuable lesson, and that's that the outside world is a reflection of my inner reality. So when I'm getting triggered and upset, I'm upset because how is that a reflection of something inside of me that judges or relates or finds myself less worthy or doesn't accept certain aspects of myself? Then I look inside, in this situation here that's upsetting me, I look back into my own life and start to go, when did I feel like that in my own life? Who did I judge in that situation? How did I judge myself in that situation? And then the place for empowerment is to really visit that and see if that was necessarily true. This new belief system, these facts that came from that, is it really true? And again, coming from a place of empowerment and ownership is going that I am responsible for my own feelings. Nobody else can make me feel some way without me choosing to buy into that, choosing to believe that. No one can disrespect me unless in some way, some part in me disrespects itself. And again, this isn't to condone or enable an action out here. It's how do I empower myself? So how I empower myself is I get to look inside and go like, wait, how do I do that to me? How can I use this unfortunate situation? But it happened. That's the what is part. How can I, instead of trying to change what is, what I can do is now look inside and go like, how do I relate to that? And use that as an opportunity for healing, for growth, to learn to love myself more unconditionally. Perfectionism. I was an expert at this and continue in some ways, and it's just a journey, man. I know a lot of us can relate to this. So, unconditional love. Whoo, that's a good one, right? Again, how many of us go through life and like, oh, we like ourselves, we love ourselves in some ways, but we're also like, wait, but once I'm X, Y, and Z, then I'll be good enough. Then I'll be worthy. Once I'm this weight, or I'm this fit, or I get this job, or I get this boyfriend or girlfriend, then I'll be happy. Then I'll be good enough. And that will be a reflection. That will be validation in some way of how I want to feel about myself. Now, the only problem with that, as soon as that's taken away, then now that disturbs the way that you wanted to feel. Right? You found that person and it helped you feel the way you always wanted to feel about yourself, but as soon as they start doing it wrong, differently than you want them to, or once you lose that job, or I got hurt and suddenly I no longer had that reflection of the worthiness that I wanted to feel. I no longer had a reason to wake up in the morning. It was a struggle, man. But how was that a reflection of the own judgments I had about myself? Or even trying to heal my body. People always come to me like, how'd you do that? How'd you heal yourself? Like, because they're so attached to like fixing that. Because if they fix that, then it fixes their perceived problem. And what I'm saying is, yes, let's work towards healing and moving forward. And that doesn't mean that I have to experience it in a place of lack, in a place of being unworthy or not good enough until I overcome that. It was a real struggle for me as a man to go through, as not only a man, but an athlete and law enforcement. I was used to taking control over like the results that I wanted to see in life. But when suddenly I wasn't capable to control those things anymore, and I wasn't able to overcome those things anymore, it could only mean one thing about me: that I wasn't good enough, that I failed, that I was failing, and how that was a reflection of I must have been doing it wrong, that I am doing it wrong. But was that true? My experience is no, it wasn't true. But it exposed all kinds of judgments that I made about myself, about my own worthiness, and how, more importantly, belief systems of how we should and shouldn't be, how a man should be. And if he's not, then he only means this. It's a weakness. It's asking for help's a weakness. Expressing my own pain and struggles I go through is a weakness. So living on those belief systems, the last thing I was ever going to do was to tell people how miserable it was for me. Was I going to tell people, was I going to ask someone for help? Wanting to be independent, thinking that somehow that was a reflection of my own independence and strength. You know what strength is? Vulnerability, transparency, and how can I love myself more unconditionally? Whether or not it ever change, whether or not I ever get better. Is there some part in you that's will only love yourself conditionally? How's that a reflection of what's going on in the world today? How are people not willing to love someone else? How are you not willing to love somebody else unless they do it X, Y, and Z? That means your love is conditional, which is fine, again, but just recognize and make sure you get in alignment with your actions and how you're being. And there's also room for grace and ease, because guess what? Even as we learn and understand that, I was a perfect example of learning these things and growing from these things, but my own perfectionism then told me I had to be perfect at doing that I knew better. So I had to learn for me to even have more grace and ease for my own mistakes, perceived mistakes. So a big part of my journey became like learning to just be an acceptance of my humanness, my flawness, if you want to call it that. And how can I not just resign to that, but really move into acceptance and cooperation with it? This is another great one. Lack and scarcity. Well, here are the words of abundance and gratitude. But then we have to stop and ask ourselves, in these times, am I operating from a place of lack and scarcity? Or am I coming from a place of abundance, a place of gratitude? And then as you learn more about law of attraction, a lot of us have learned so much about this. Again, energy follows thought. Where are my thoughts at? And I'm not talking about you just write, 15 things you're grateful for in the morning, and then you spend the rest of the day thinking about lack and thinking about scarcity and unfairness and all that stuff. But what you do know and what you have learned is when you're able to shift that mindset to be more in an attitude of gratitude, that's what brings more of that in. So again, use the outside world to reflect on you, how you are with yourself. How have I in the past always focused on what I didn't do correct? How was I hard on myself, especially with a sports background? I always focused, what did I do wrong there? And then I started to attach a meaning to it and a lack to it, and not acknowledging the things that I am doing right, the things that I am grateful for and thankful for. My focus was always, it was essentially taking the 1% and making it feel like the 99%. And I see that a lot in our society right now. How do we focus on the little things that we're not doing perfect, and then they get beaten into our heads all day, every day from media, social media, and then at some point it starts to feel like that's 99% of what's going on in the world. And I have to ask you, is that really true? And what are your belief systems, and are you in alignment with it? If you want to bring more greatness, you want to bring more goodness, you want to bring more peace, more love, if you want to bring more of that in the world, where is your focus at? Is it on those things? Is it an attitude of gratitude, or are you in the lack, in the scarcity, and are you in some way condoning or enabling that out of your own fear, out of your own self-righteousness? Again, this is just a check-in. You could be on either side of these lines. Just be in integrity with yourself, be in alignment, and recognize like that's what I'm choosing. That's a form of empowerment. Reactive, responsive. Hey, this is one I've worked with myself again a ton with, because I'm very responsive to things, and then there's certain aspects where I found myself being much more reactive. Where are those moments at, and what is triggering those things? Again, reactiveness, obviously, that's coming from a more emotional response. That's coming from my upset. That's coming from aspects of me that fear, right? So how can I be more responsive in life? How can I become more of an observer of my human experience, of my ego's experience of the circumstances, the situations, the conditions. And because that's who we really are, it was we're the one that's able to observe all the monkey mind, all the inner dialogue that's telling all the stories, all the negative fantasizing. Oh, this and that this is what's going to happen. And it's just a form of protection. It's a defense mechanism from us, from the survival mentality. And we just have to, again, get grounded in where is it that I'm wanting to move towards? Where is it that I'm wanting to come from? How am I being the change that I want to see in the world? An inner experience. Apathy, sympathy. Empathy, compassion. Again, it's easy sometimes because we quote unquote care to move into this space of sympathy. And we believe that that's what loving or caring means. And I just have to ask, is that necessarily true? I think any parent out there knows that sometimes you're making a decision or a choice that your child or person isn't going to experience as wonderful or great. That kid's going to cry like crazy when you take the scissors away from them because they don't understand. They don't see it. Now, if all of a sudden they're crying and it seems horrible and miserable and you just decide like, okay, well, I'm just going to give it back to them because, oh my God, look how much pain they're in. And now they think that I'm a horrible mother or father. Sometimes we have to make choices and we're not always right. However, what I do know is that we're all doing the best we know how to do based on our past circumstances, situations, and conditions. And to me, that's what empathy is. Empathy is an equation. It's a formula. It's like recognizing that I'm getting this result from this individual. Well, instead of coming from anger or taking it personal, what does that mean about me? What does that mean? What the story is, the negative fantasizing, it allows me to become more it allows me to become more of the observer and go like, okay, that's interesting that we had that result. And it's not to condone or enable it, but it allows me to sit more in my loving and go, well, what circumstances, situations, and conditions much that of human had, and what kind of experiences must they have had in their life to equal this result? Again, it doesn't mean to condone it or to enable it. It doesn't mean to let them off. We live in a society that has rules, guidelines, laws. So, hey, if someone murders someone and they have to go to prison for life, then so be it. It doesn't mean having empathy means I just let them off. I don't hold them accountable or responsible for their actions. That's not what we're saying. That's what sympathy would go into. So I think there's a great opportunity to be like, and how's that a reflection of maybe how I'm really hard on myself? Is there ways in which I lack empathy and compassion for my own self because I perceive that I should be doing it better? Is there ways that I have sympathy and that leads into me blaming others for my experiences? Are there things that I've given up on in life? Are there ways in which I've resigned to not fulfill my inner guidance towards something and then live in this space of sympathy? Again, I'm not telling you to do it or to not do it. I'm just giving you an opportunity to check inside. This is what I had to do with myself, man. I went through my own struggles and went back into my own fear and old survival mentality with everything that's going on and my upset, and then rationalized it and justified it. But then I know enough that once I stopped being reactive and started to become more of an observer of my thoughts, of my belief systems, and that gave me, that allowed me to step into empowerment. Okay, well, I know I'm responsible for my own emotional upset. No one else is responsible for it but me. So let me check inside, let me empower myself. That's interesting. How's that a reflection of how I might be with myself? I go, oh, that's interesting. Oh, maybe an old version of myself, old belief systems got triggered again, and I went into my fear. And then I had to check in with myself and go, am I being the change that I want to see in the world? And I realized for me, I'm on the right side of this line here. tolerance, love, acceptance, equality, justice, empowerment, ownership, responsibility, unconditional love, abundance, gratitude. I want to be responsive, and I want to come more from a place of empathy and compassion for myself and others. And so I got to check in, and I made me recalibrate and make sure I got back in alignment with that in which I want to be in the world. That change that I want to see in the world, I'm going to lead by example by being that. And that's the most beautiful thing, is each and every one of us, regardless of our job, if we have one, if we don't have one, regardless of where we live, regardless of what neighborhood we're in, we can have empathy and compassion. Everybody's going through the same journey, I promise you. If you're focused on the external circumstances and saying they don't get it, they don't understand, they didn't grow up in my neighborhood, they're not my sex, they're not my race, they're not my whatever it is, I promise you, whether you grew up in the hood or you grew up in the richest part of town, you're going through the same journey in life. And that's recognizing to love yourself unconditionally. To move, we all have this journey of questioning our self-worth, of our value, of our importance, of our meaning. And this journey of life is to peel those layers back, to forgive those misjudgments, to forgive those judgments against myself, against others, and learn to love and accept all aspects of myself just the way they are, whether they never ever change. So just consider this. It's been my experience that it's helped me move to a greater place of peace, of love, of compassion. It shifted the way that I experience the world and the way that things are happening. And I learned to empower myself by going, life is happening for me, not to me. Move out of victimization, move into empowerment. And again, be on whatever side of the line you want to be on. Kick it over here if you want. I'm not telling you not to, just know that you're choosing that, because then that's even empowerment. There's times I get upset and I want to, you know what? But I sit there and I go, you know what? I'm choosing to be upset. The little boy on me wants to pout and be frustrated. And you know, and then part of having grace, empathy, and compassion, I let myself be like that for, you know, not a long time, maybe like 30 minutes or an hour. And then, but you know what? I go, I'm choosing to be that way. So hey, you want to be that way? And recognize it and go, you know what? I'm being that. Have compassion for it, and then allow yourself to get back into your loving. And I promise you, you're in your loving, the natural byproduct of it, there's a lot of these attributes we're speaking of right here on the right side. So anyways, have a beautiful, wonderful day. I love you guys. This is going to be some really interesting times moving forward, and incredible chances for you to check in and be like, where am I at right now? And what do I want to be? And am I being that change that I want to see in the world from the inner space, the inner energy? Peace and love.